Welcome to Voodoo Whiskey Gaming, and this is my late review of Sherlock Holmes Chapter One. I played on the Xbox Series X. It's also available on the Xbox Series S, Xbox One, PS5, PS4, and PC. Alright, so let's get into the story. First off, and not too surprisingly, you play as Sherlock Holmes. But this is a younger Sherlock Holmes, and the main goal of the story really starts out with he begins exploring into his past, find out what really happened to his mother, and then it just kind of goes from there. But of course, because it's a mystery and you gotta solve a mystery, so there's more to it than that, and I'm not gonna go into it because, spoilers. But what I will say is I hated the younger Sherlock Holmes. Honestly, there are a few story elements in this game that I really just kind of despised. I mean, it is really unfortunate, but they're just kind of dumb elements. The whole younger Sherlock Holmes thing is fine, except for they try so very hard to make him cool. And it gets a little cheesy that way, but I'll get into that a bit more later on. But I do like the stories for a lot of the side stories, and I am curious to see where the main story goes from, where it is. As for the audio, I think the voiceover work is good for the majority of the characters. Some of the lesser characters, though, it does start to get, pretty dicey. But not exactly the worst stuff that I've heard, so I'm good with that. As for the music, I really enjoyed the music in this game. I thought it was very well done. It definitely fits with, your Sherlock vibe. And then when it comes to the sound effects, I think they did a really good job with the sound effects because unlike the previous games, this is a open world game, open world-ish. And so they had to do sound effects for the city, and I thought they did a decent job with those. I'm not going to say they were amazing, but overall I was happy with the sound effects. Now let's get into the gameplay mechanics and whatnot, and this is a third-person adventure game. It starts to veer a little away from that interactive narrative level of some of the previous games because while you do a lot of the same stuff, they add that open world element. There's a much more action-oriented element as well. So first off, it's not like a full-blown giant world. It is a city, and you can run around said city freely as well as, all of its different districts. There are even shops, there are side missions, there are kind of secret-ish side missions as well that you can take on. And I gotta say, I liked that element of the game. At first I wasn't too into it, but then I started playing and I really started to enjoy that. As for the action element, I really wasn't as big into that. Everything boils down to run around, shoot guy in weak point, run up, melee. And so that got a little, tedious, honestly. They try to mix it up by giving you environmental ways to stun them and yada yada, but several of the environmental ways don't necessarily work, and when you're doing it, there are definitely some clipping issues that occur. The combat kind of suffers from something the entire game really does kind of suffer from, and that is just poor tutorials. When you learn something new, you do get a little thing up in the corner that says you can go look at a tutorial. I think it would be better if they just ran you through the proper tutorial. And it works fine for some things, but it doesn't work as well for everything. Press B to crouch. Okay, fine, that's easy enough. But then when you have to do their little QuickTime melee attack thing, you don't get the greatest explanation for that. When you have to learn to listen to certain things, you don't get, the best tutorial for that. So I was really disappointed with the tutorial in this game. I think they really needed to take some time and put some effort into having a proper tutorial. I'm also going to bitch and moan for a moment because it's an episodic game, and I'm just never a huge fan of episodic games being episode by episode. If you take the full game and break it into individual chapters, I'm fine with that, but then having to wait in between those, not so much. Just let me binge it. I will say the running around worked well, and the investigation elements are very familiar from, say, the previous games, and they work well in this game. I actually do like them. But again, it is one of those things where, a better tutorial would make it better. Once you get the hang of it, it works really well for the most part. There were still some places where I couldn't find all of the evidence. I found all the evidence I needed, but I couldn't find all the evidence to find, 100% of the evidence. And your abilities that are supposed to help you with that didn't really help me with that. So I don't know, maybe it could have been glitched. There was one where there was definitely a glitch where a piece of evidence that I was supposed to be able to examine, I definitely couldn't examine. I know this because there were a few times where I resorted to a guide, specifically when I couldn't find 100% of the evidence, and there were times where I couldn't find what I needed. I guess wanted more than needed, but still. And because there are a good number of cutscenes and dialogue situations, I really wish this game had a pause feature. I mean, you can pause when you're not in those situations, but when you are, you cannot pause, and that's kind of obnoxious. You can't even go out to like the Xbox menu to pause. It will continue to run. Now let's get into the controls, and I gotta say the controls actually work pretty well. The movement isn't flawless, but it works well enough, and the aiming is actually better than I would have expected. And I do think the controls respond very well. So overall, I'm happy with the controls. Now let's get into the graphics and visuals, and the first thing I will say is I think the world they built is very beautiful. But there are certain details that are lacking. There's a lot of clipping through things, like branches and stuff, that could look better and be done better. But like visually, the design and the detail in parts of the world are really well done, but the detail in how you interact with the world, not so much. As for the people, they look good and they have a design to them, but it's not like 100% normal human is how I would describe it. But since they all kind of fit that, it does work. It's just a little odd at the same time. I do like the way they visually represent the different elements of investigation. I think that was very well done. But I think visually this game has more than a few issues as well, and they're pretty noticeable. Like, as I mentioned, the way your character interacts with the world, movement animations can be very weird, going upstairs and how you kind of almost jump off at the top stair. It's kind of weird. But also, John just kind of disappears at times and then reappears where he's supposed to be. As well as there were times where, like, I was clipping through things. There was a time in combat where me and the guy clipped into this object and then clipped back out. There's a water fountain near the beginning that looks really shitty, and it just like looks weirdly pixelated, but like it's blurring the stuff around it in like an unnatural way. It was ugly. And to address something that I had mentioned earlier, I really don't like the visual redesign of Sherlock. It's very clear that they're like, hey, he's young and cool, he wears a chain, kind of thing. It was really dumb, quite frankly. I also had a moment where there was like weird like colored squares appearing on my character's face, and then like John teleports into the world and it always looks really unnatural, and there's just some serious visual issues with this game that when they occur, they kind of take you out of it because you can't help but see them. So there are some issues with the visuals in this game, and it is disappointing. So to wrap this up, I am interested in the story. I am enjoying what's there so far. I am annoyed that it's episodic. I'm also annoyed that the quality isn't better. But I'm kind of in it for the long haul since I already paid for the full season, so we will see where it goes. But for now, I would say wait and see. Don't jump in immediately. Okay, so in the comments down below, why don't you tell me if you've played any of the previous Sherlock Holmes games? And as always, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please hit that like button. And if you like what I'm doing in general, share and subscribe. Have a good one.